My name is William McLaughlan and I'm 39.
Where are you from?
I'm Glaswegian, I'm from Glasgow.
What are you working as and or studying at the moment?
So just now I am doing a HNC at Glasgow Kelvin in graphic design, and mainly working as an artist and illustrator. I'm working on some book illustration and I'm also making some comics as well.
What is it that you want to be or you want to do?
When I grow up, I want to be, I'd like to keep making comics. I've been published now twice as an artist. We've got something in the pipeline as a writer that's a short. I'd like to do that and to keep working on longer form comics.
Why do you want to be a part of the industry?
Well, I had a career change. So about 4 years ago I was quite unwell. I used to work as a filmmaker, was on location. I could do that for a while I was getting treatment for an illness, and I just was doing a lot of drawing, and ironically I seem to have been able to work backwards and kind of get back into film. I didn't think I'd be working in film anymore, but there's sort of pre-production and concept art jobs that are kind of open, I think.
Are there any influences in the industry that you particularly look up to?
So influence-wise, I've got lots of influences. I think there's people like Jim Lee, Frank Miller, who are artists. I really admire their style. Recently, people like Andrea Sorrentino, who's an Italian artist, and they're doing a lot of kind of very deconstructed stuff and things like their layouts and things like that. So yeah, I've got loads of influences.
How do you prepare before you start like a new project or assignment?
So before I start a new project, I'm going to do a lot of research. I'm going to look at how other people have approached the material. I'll look up any historical context. I'll get tons and tons of reference images. My iPad, my phone are just filled with weird photos that just wouldn't make any sense to people unless they knew that I was drawing. But really that's where most creative projects begin for me, is like loads of research, get as much material as possible, and then just start exploring. So stuff like the Scott McCloud books, they're fantastic, really, really good, but I couldn't read them cover to cover more than once. I think I've read them once. And then stuff like mixed in things like some fine art stuff. I was doing a lot of plant studies at one point, so like looking at Lucy and Freud. And then some of the comics are like particularly old, so stuff like Crumb. I mean, not super old, but maybe older than things like the people who are going to be the influence on me, like folk like Jim Lee. And this is like really far away, I suppose, from where I was starting. But there's a lot of stuff when you're looking at these that you can just steal other people's amazing ideas. You know, the fact that he's shooting, or the fact that he's painting this scene with like ink washes and stuff rather than being a sort of digital flat black binary pencil. Really cool.
Do you work with pen to paper or digitally, or is there one that you prefer over the other?
I think working pen to paper and digitally is kind of almost the same process for me. With a lot of my physical drawings, I take them into Procreate or Clip Studio afterwards and then work on them more, embellish them. Also find it quite challenging to draw entirely digitally. I love starting with a pencil sketch. I do sometimes work, if I'm on holiday or whatever, I've got my sketchbook, I might not have my iPad, or if I'm lazy, I might just have my iPad. I can do one or the other, but I like the hybrid aspect of it.
What are your thoughts on the industry as like a whole?
I think the comic book industry is very interesting, especially coming from a film background. I'm much more familiar with, the British film industry, the American studio system, how indie film works and how the internet's affected that. With comics, I'm kind of late to the game in terms of like looking at it as somebody that might create comics.
So how long have you actually been working in the industry?
So I started drawing pretty seriously about 4 years ago, and I've had 2 published comics. One where I was the art assistant, and then bumped up to a fully credited artist, and the other one that I did entirely myself, which I wrote and draw on my own. In terms of working in the industry, I think that things have changed slightly, in that now you don't really break into the industry in the way that you might have in the past. Now I think it's more that you build an audience and a following and you sell directly to them. So if you look at very commercially successful artists, like there's guys called the Etherington brothers who make sort of how to draw books. They've made millions of pounds on Kickstarter themselves, because they've built their following and they've done their work and they've self-published. So it's kind of changed days. Now one of the big publishers in the UK is Titan Comics. I think probably you need something very, very polished and completely finished that was exactly what they were looking for them to publish it. So I think it's kind of changed now. I think in some respects you've got to be a lot more generating your own content and realising the sales, and that's not necessarily just a challenge. That can be a good thing if it pays off as well. So this is my very first published work, Tiny Ream Scene. My friend Brian got me in that, and here's my print. I did a little vampire bat for a vampire themed issue. Next I got brought on this war comic as the assistant and got bumped up to being a co-artist, which was good. And then my most recent project was in Debut by Clan Comics, and did a 20-page written and illustrated kind of horror comic about a crazy policeman who kills people with a chainsaw. Butchering some baddies. It's interesting because there's a lot of like other artists featured in these kind of books. That's where there's a big appeal, is that you don't necessarily have to be stuck with just what I'm doing.
Do you support like local independent comic book stores? Like, is there any like novels that you go in and you see and you're like, oh, I know one of them's out, I'll pick that up, anything like that?
I buy most of my books second hand. I do like supporting local comic shops where I can. I'm probably going to buy local comics by local creators if I go somewhere like Forbidden Planet. In terms of buying like the sort of books that I own, almost everything's second hand from eBay, just because it's so much cheaper, and comics fans, if they're buying nice versions of books, they take better care of them than most bookshops.
Is it expensive to draw, and have you found ways or any tricks to reduce the cost to increase your time working?
Is it expensive to draw? That's a really good question. You can make it expensive to draw. You can also make it really, really cheap. I mean, here I've got my sketchbook, that's probably £5 or £6, and a pencil, £2, a pound, don't know. That's what you need. Like, that's the bare minimum. If you want to spend thousands of pounds, you can get like a full Adobe suite, like a lovely sort of touch screen monitor, stylus and stuff. That's cool. But to begin with, sketchbook and pencil, pen, that's it. That's the minimum. So you can get really expensive, but no, keep it cheap.
How would you describe what a comic/graphic novel actually is?
A comic or a graphic novel is, well, essentially those are the same things. A graphic novel, I think people like to think is somehow more worthwhile or like highbrow than a comic, but ultimately the medium is comics. It's just pictures that tell a story. Most of the time there's words. Some of my favourites don't have any words at all.